Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The sun had barely crept over the edge of Del Mar Beach, casting a thin line of golden light across the sand as the wind from the Pacific bit into the skin of every recruit standing in formation. The sea glistened, cold and endless, whispering promises of pain and exhaustion. Fort Del Mar Naval Base was already alive, boots slamming against gravel, whistles piercing the air, the distant bark of orders echoing across the shoreline. Jordan Hale stood among them, her boots planted, her spine straight, her eyes fixed forward. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tattoo on her right forearm, an eagle gripping an anchor, was enough to draw glances and smirks from some of the guys around her. One of them, Lucas, tilted his head toward Evan and muttered just loud enough, "Guess she thought this was some weekend retreat." Evan chuckled, not even hiding it. "Probably quits before breakfast." Jordan heard them. She didn't flinch. This wasn't her first storm. She adjusted the strap of her pack as the first whistle shrieked through the air. The squad moved forward, running in tight formation toward the shoreline. The sand shifted under their boots, every step heavier than the last. The cold surf loomed ahead like a wall. The moment their feet hit the water, the cold punched into their bones. Several recruits gasped. A few cursed. Jordan just kept going. The water reached her chest and stole the breath from her lungs, but she didn't stop. Down. Under, came the command. They dove. The Pacific swallowed them whole. Jordan's heart pounded as her body screamed against the chill. Her vision blurred momentarily from the salt water, but she pushed through the current, resurfacing with calm determination. The others came up around her, some sputtering, some shivering. Lucas looked at her for a split second, surprised she was still going. But he said nothing. By mid-morning, the entire unit was soaked, sand crusting on their uniforms, muscles already burning. They were dragged through log carries, boat lifts, sprints, push-ups in the surf, all under the relentless instruction of Commander Keegan, who watched like a hawk. Jordan's hands bled slightly from the rope carries, but she didn't falter. She caught herself once when her foot slid on a slick rock, but she didn't stay down. Evan sneered as she stumbled. "You're in over your head, Hale," he whispered as they lined up again. Jordan didn't reply. She focused on her breathing, on the waves, on the silence in her head. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because she had to be. The hours dragged on. One by one, cracks started to form. Some recruits slowed. A few threw up behind the dunes. One had to be pulled out of the surf after cramping. Jordan kept moving. Not because it was easy, but because she refused to quit. That night in the barracks, while others groaned and checked their bruises, Jordan sat quietly in her bunk, tracing the edges of her tattoo. Her fingers paused over the eagle's wings. She could still hear Ryan's voice in her head. Clear. Steady. "You know why you're here." Outside, the waves kept crashing. But she was still standing. And tomorrow, she'd rise again. The whistle cut through the pre-dawn fog, sharp and merciless. Jordan jolted upright, her muscles screaming in protest. The barracks filled with the sound of boots hitting the floor and groans muffled under heavy breaths. It was only day 2, and already the line between strength and exhaustion was blurring. She pulled on her damp uniform, the smell of salt and sweat still clinging to the fabric, and stepped outside into the cold air. The sky above Fort Del Mar was gray, the ocean a mirror of steel. Commander Keegan's voice thundered across the sand. "Move. Formation by the surf. You think yesterday was hard? That was a warm-up." His words hit them like waves, unforgiving, constant, relentless. Jordan fell into line with the others. Lucas and Evan were just ahead of her, muttering under their breath. "Still here," Evan said, half sneering. "Guess she's too stubborn to quit." Lucas didn't laugh this time. His jaw tightened. Something about the way Jordan had carried herself yesterday, steady, silent, unflinching, had stuck with him. The whistle blew again. They ran. The wind tore at their faces as they sprinted down the dunes, the sand biting into their legs. The sound of boots, shouting, and waves blended into a single rhythm of chaos. Their first challenge of the day, the boat carry. 6 men and 1 woman lifting a wooden training boat over their heads, running across 3 miles of shifting sand. The weight crushed down on their shoulders, their arms trembling. Jordan locked her elbows, keeping pace. The men around her grunted and cursed. One of them stumbled, nearly tipping the boat. Jordan shifted her weight instinctively, balancing the load before it could fall. Lucas noticed, breathing hard beside her. "Don't slow down," she barked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise. He didn't argue. By the time they reached the checkpoint, their bodies were drenched in sweat. Keegan watched them without a word, his expression unreadable. When they finally dropped the boat, some collapsed immediately. Jordan didn't. She stood still, her chest heaving, her face expressionless. Hours blurred together, ocean dives, rope climbs, log drags, and more cold water. Each test chipped away at them, breaking bodies and exposing limits. During a dive drill, Evan's panic broke through the surface. He kicked wildly, disoriented by the cold and pressure. Without hesitation, Jordan moved in, steadying him by the vest, forcing him upright. "Breathe," she ordered firmly. He gasped, then nodded, shame replacing arrogance. When they finally crawled back onto shore, the sun was already setting, painting the ocean in streaks of orange and crimson. Keegan stood at the waterline, hands behind his back. "You either adapt," he said evenly, "or you ring the bell." His gaze lingered on Jordan for a moment longer than the others, then he turned away. That night, the barracks were quieter. The laughter from the first day was gone. Most recruits lay in silence, too tired to speak. Jordan sat by her bunk again, hands raw and blistered, tracing her tattoo beneath the dim light. The ink had started to fade under layers of mud and salt, but its meaning burned brighter than ever. She closed her eyes and saw Ryan again, standing tall in his uniform, the same calm strength in his eyes that had carried her this far. "Pain means you're still in the fight," he'd once told her. She whispered the words to herself now, barely audible. "I'm still in the fight." Outside, the Pacific roared against the shore, demanding more, always more. Tomorrow, it would take everything she had. And she would give it, without hesitation. The third day began with the kind of cold that seeped into the bones, the kind that made fingers numb and lungs burn just from breathing. Jordan stood at the edge of Del Mar Beach before dawn, already soaked, already shaking, already aching from the 2 days prior. Around her, the other recruits dragged themselves into place, eyes hollow, bodies barely responding. The instructors weren't yelling as much this morning. They didn't have to. The silence said enough. Hell Week was no longer an idea, it was a living thing, pressing down on every joint, every nerve. The day started with underwater navigation. No sun, no guide, just blackness and frigid water. The goal, swim through a submerged obstacle course, surface only at marked intervals. Jordan's chest tightened the moment she dove. The cold shocked her senses, the disorientation nearly made her panic. But she fought through it, counting strokes, visualizing her path, ignoring the growing ache in her lungs. One of the recruits surfaced too early. Another shot up gasping for air, triggering a sharp blast from the instructor's whistle. Jordan didn't waver. When she surfaced at the right point, she heard the commotion behind her, someone was struggling. She turned in the water just in time to see Evan clawing at the surface, confused and spinning. She swam toward him, grabbed the back of his vest, and forced him to breathe. Again. And again. They made it back to shore. He didn't say a word. Just stared at the ground, ashamed. She didn't need his thanks. The team moved from the ocean straight into log PT, carrying massive logs on their shoulders through the dunes. Sand clung to their soaked uniforms, the heat of the rising sun turning the wet fabric into a weight of its own. Lucas cursed under his breath as they stumbled up a slope, the log nearly dropping. Jordan ducked under it without thinking, taking some of the weight. "I've got it," she muttered. He gave her a stunned look, then nodded, pushing forward with her. They finished the evolution crawling, faces in the sand, arms trembling. No water break, no pause. The instructors moved them straight into the next drill. Obstacle course. Ropes, walls, beams, mud pits. By this point, the body doesn't ask permission to quit, it just starts to. Jordan felt it. Her grip failed twice on the rope climb. Her foot slipped on the beam. She slammed her shoulder into the mud on a bad landing. And yet, she got up every time. Lieutenant Brooks stood at the far end of the course, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. She said nothing as Jordan passed, soaked and bleeding, but their eyes met briefly. And in that single second, there was something like approval. Not spoken. But seen. As the sun dipped low again, painting the sky over Fort Del Mar in orange and deep violet, the recruits huddled around the fire barrels near the edge of the barracks. Nobody joked anymore. Nobody talked about quitting out loud, but they all thought it. You could see it in the way they moved, the hesitation, the twitch in the eyes when the bell rang in the distance for someone else. Jordan sat alone on the steps, unwrapping her fingers with slow, deliberate care. Her hands were torn open in places, her palms layered with raw skin and salt burns. The tattoo on her forearm was half covered in grime, the eagle's wings barely visible now. She wiped it gently with her sleeve. Ryan's voice echoed again. Not loud. Not motivational. Just, steady, you don't win by being loud. You win by not stopping. She let that thought settle. She hadn't come here to win anyone over. She hadn't come here to survive quietly. She came to finish what he started. The night settled over Fort Del Mar like a weighted blanket, full of tension and ghosts. Jordan lay on her bunk, eyes wide open, muscles twitching from strain. Every part of her hurt. But inside that pain, there was something else growing, something steadier than pride, tougher than pain. Conviction. She was still in the fight. And tomorrow, she would lead. Whether they saw it or not. The fourth day began under a sky that looked bruised, heavy with fog and salt. The air stung with cold, but there was no hesitation in the recruits as they stumbled from the barracks. Everyone knew what day it was, the crucible. The make-or-break test that separated those who would endure from those who would quit. Commander Keegan's voice thundered across the dunes before sunrise. This is where you find out who you really are. His words hung in the mist like a warning. Jordan's body was wrecked, every muscle torn, every joint screaming, but her mind was sharper than ever. The tattoo on her arm burned as she tightened the strap on her gear. Lucas stood nearby, silent for once. Evan looked at her briefly, then looked away. Respect didn't need words here. They began with a 4-mile run through the dunes carrying full packs, weapons, and training dummies that mimicked injured soldiers. The weight crushed down on them instantly. Sand poured into their boots, wind howled against their faces, and every step felt like pushing through fire. A recruit behind Jordan stumbled hard, face first into the sand. She didn't think twice, she turned back, grabbed his pack strap, and yanked him upright. "Move," she shouted, voice raw. "We finished together." By the time they reached the halfway point, several had fallen out. The instructors didn't yell anymore, they just watched. The ones who remained didn't need to be told what this meant. Next came the ocean swim. The surf was vicious, the tide pulling them sideways as the cold tore through their suits. Keegan's whistle cut through the roar. "Under," he barked. Jordan plunged beneath the waves, the salt burning her eyes. Her lungs screamed for air, her vision blurred, but she held steady, counting the seconds. When she surfaced, Lucas was ahead, but one of the others, young recruit named Morales, was flailing, panicking in the current. Jordan swam toward him, grabbed his vest, and forced him above water. He gasped violently, clutching her arm. "I got you," she said through chattering teeth. They reached shore as a group, dragging themselves through the foam like survivors of a shipwreck. No one laughed. No one taunted. Just breathing, heavy and in sync. Then came the mud crawl. Endless, suffocating, brutal. The instructors fired blank rounds overhead as they dragged their bodies through a pit of freezing sludge. Every inch forward felt like a mile. Evan was beside her, face covered in mud, teeth gritted. He looked at her once, then said between breaths, "You don't stop, do you?" Jordan didn't answer. She just kept crawling. Hours passed. The crucible didn't stop for exhaustion. Rope climbs, push-ups, weighted carries, all chained together until every mind broke except those who refused. The sky had gone from gray to gold to deep blue, and still they pushed. By nightfall, their final task came, the boat carry. The same wooden beast that had nearly crushed them on day 2. They lifted it together, 7 figures moving through darkness and wind. Jordan took point. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. "Left foot. Right foot. Keep the pace," she commanded. The boat wobbled, then stabilized. They moved as one. When they finally reached the end marker, collapsing into the sand, Keegan was there waiting. He didn't shout this time. He just nodded once. That's what a team looks like. The recruits sat in silence, chests heaving, hands shaking. Lucas leaned back, looking at Jordan. "You led that," he muttered. She shook her head. "We led it." The moonlight cast long shadows across the beach, and for the first time since training began, the laughter that rose wasn't mocking, it was real. A release. A quiet understanding among those who had been broken and rebuilt. Later, when the others drifted to sleep in the barracks, Jordan sat awake again, staring at her arm. The tattoo glimmered faintly under the low light, an eagle clutching an anchor, wings spread wide. She whispered into the still air, "We did it, Ryan." Outside, the wind howled through the dunes, carrying the scent of salt and triumph. The crucible was over. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of what she was meant to become. When the recruits woke on the 5th day, the air inside the barracks felt different. It wasn't lighter, there was still pain, fatigue, and soreness in every movement, but something had shifted. The instructors didn't need to say it. Everyone could feel it. Those who remained had already crossed a line most people never would. Jordan moved slower that morning. Not because she was weak, but because every part of her body was in survival mode. Her hands were wrapped in gauze, her shoulders stiff, her knees scraped raw. Yet when the whistle blew, she was up, gear in hand, boots laced. No hesitation. Out on Del Mar Beach, the team lined up in silence. The sunrise spilled across the horizon like fire. Commander Keegan stood before them, arms behind his back, expression unreadable. "You're still here," he said finally. "That means something." His eyes swept the line. "But this last stretch will show us what kind of SEALs you might become." The day began with a timed course, underwater drills, dune runs, rope climbs. Standard protocol, but after 4 days of hell, even the basics felt like a mountain. Jordan kept her breathing steady as she moved through each station, no longer trying to prove anything. She just did what needed to be done. Lucas ran beside her on the beach sprint, his breath ragged. "You good?" he asked between gasps. "I'm alive," she said flatly. "That's enough," he grinned. Next came a tactical simulation. Each squad was tasked with moving an injured teammate through a mock battlefield filled with obstacles. Jordan's squad got Morales. They had to move him through a half-mile course under time, with instructors shouting distractions and simulated gunfire echoing around them. Evan took lead first, barking orders, but he got flustered when they hit a section of tangled ropes. They stalled. Then Jordan stepped in. "Shift right. Evan, take his feet. Lucas, left flank. Move when I say go." They listened. No questions. She counted them down. 3, 2, 1, go. They moved. Not perfect, not fast, but coordinated. Efficient. When they crossed the finish line, Keegan looked up from his clipboard and gave a single nod. That was enough. Back at the barracks, morale had changed. Jokes returned, not cruel ones, but exhausted ones. Shared glances. Small nods of respect. Nobody talked about the bell anymore. That night, after dinner, Jordan sat on the steps outside, staring at the ocean. The tide rolled in quietly now, less like a threat and more like a reminder. Her arms were covered in scratches, her legs bruised, her eyes ringed with fatigue. But her posture didn't bend. Evan walked over and sat beside her, awkwardly. "I was wrong about you," he said after a moment. She didn't look at him. "Yeah. I know. I'm not the only one. I know that too." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You ever gonna let that tattoo fade?" "Nope. It means something." She finally turned her head, eyes meeting his. "Everything." He nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad you're here." She didn't respond. Just watched the horizon. Inside, a few of the others were trading stories, mostly about screw-ups, close calls, and times they thought they couldn't make it. Her name came up more than once. "Jordan pulled me out of the water. She carried the team on Crucible night. She never breaks." The words weren't said with envy. They were said with belief. With a kind of reverence usually reserved for legends. As the barracks lights dimmed and the team settled in for another short night of rest, Jordan lay on her bunk, eyes open, fingers tracing the now faded ink on her arm. The eagle and anchor still held. Still fierce. Ryan's voice drifted through her mind again. "Endurance isn't about strength. It's about not giving up when strength runs out." And she hadn't. She was still here. Tomorrow was graduation. And she was ready. The sixth morning rose slow and golden, spilling light across Del Mar Beach as if the ocean itself was exhaling in relief. The fog had cleared, the air was still, and for the first time all week, there was no whistle. No screaming instructors. Just silence. Jordan stood alone outside the barracks, hands tucked into her jacket sleeves, eyes locked on the horizon. The Pacific stretched out endlessly before her, calm now, like it, too, had acknowledged their war was over. Her body was still wrecked, her fingers still raw beneath the bandages, but her mind felt light. Steady. Inside, the others were quietly dressing in clean uniforms. No more sand-caked boots or soaked gear. Just pressed fatigues and polished brass. They moved slower than usual, not from fatigue, but from something else. Reflection, maybe. Or pride. Or both. When the announcement came to gather at the main quad, the team stepped into formation almost instinctively. Lucas stood beside her, jaw tight, eyes forward. Evan was just behind, his uniform clean, his posture sharp. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Commander Keegan stood in front of the group, his voice calm but powerful. "You've endured what most people can't imagine," he said. "You've pushed through pain, exhaustion, and doubt. But more than that, you've become a team. And within this team, leadership has emerged in ways we didn't predict. His eyes paused briefly on Jordan. Not dramatically. Just long enough for everyone to notice. One by one, names were called. Certificates were handed out. A few recruits smiled, others blinked back emotion. When they called hers, Hale, Jordan, the air shifted. She stepped forward, took the paper from Keegan's hand. Then came the salute. It wasn't forced. It wasn't protocol. Keegan stepped back, looked her in the eye, and brought his hand up, sharp, crisp, full of respect. For a second, everything stopped. No one moved. No one whispered. Lucas stared. Evan looked down. Even Lieutenant Brooks, standing off to the side with her clipboard, nodded once. Jordan returned the salute, her own hand trembling slightly, but held firm. The moment passed, but the meaning stayed. Later, when the formalities ended and the group broke into quiet conversations and laughter, she walked toward the dunes alone. The sea breeze brushed against her skin, softer now. She stood where the water met the sand and let it wash over her boots. She traced her tattoo one last time. The ink had faded, worn thin by salt and sweat, but every line was etched into her memory. Ryan, we made it. She knelt down and touched the water, letting it soak into her palms. It felt different now. Not like punishment, but like closure. Behind her, the others had begun to gather for photos, for handshakes, for memories they'd carry for life. A few called out her name. She turned and smiled, not wide, not loud. Just enough. Back at the barracks, she found a small envelope slipped into her bunk. No name. Just her initials. Inside was a note, written in steady, blocky handwriting. You led without demanding. You endured without shouting. You changed the team without ever needing to prove yourself. That's what real leadership looks like. M.K. She folded the note, tucked it into her breast pocket, and exhaled. As the sun dipped lower, casting the beach in gold and shadow, she joined the others. Not as the outsider. Not as the girl with the tattoo. But as their teammate. Their quiet leader. Her story wouldn't be told with fanfare or applause. It would be remembered in glances, in nods, in how the team moved as one when things got hard. Jordan Hale didn't just survive Hell Week. She became the reason others did.